The morning sun glowed softly over the quiet highway that wound its way just outside the city. Officer Dale sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee, the radio crackling with routine updates. Birds flew overhead, and for a moment, everything felt still, peaceful even. But Dale wasn't one to enjoy peace. No, what kept him going on these long shifts was the thrill of control. The chance to find trouble. To deal with it on his terms. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, eyes sharp, scanning every car that passed. Who doesn't belong? He often asked himself. Who's up to no good? And then, he spotted it. A sleek black sedan glided smoothly along the road. The windows were tinted just enough to make the driver's face hard to see at first. But as the car moved into the sunlight, Dale caught a clear glimpse, a black man, dressed sharply in a dark suit, both hands on the wheel, eyes focused on the road ahead. The man wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. His driving was flawless. But Dale's mind locked onto one thought: what's a guy like that doing here? He narrowed his eyes, suspicion rising for no reason other than the man's appearance. He didn't recognize the car, or the driver. And in Dale's world, that was enough. Probably out of place in this part of town, Dale muttered under his breath, feeling that familiar mix of excitement and power. Without a second thought, his hand moved to the dashboard. He flipped on the flashing lights. The siren's sharp wail broke the calm of the morning as he accelerated, closing the distance between him and the sedan. The black car signaled and smoothly pulled over to the side of the road, as if the driver had nothing to hide, because he didn't. But Dale wasn't thinking about that. He was already running through scenarios in his head. Maybe he's got drugs. Maybe he's stolen that car. Maybe he's some slick city guy trying to mess with small-town folk. The truth didn't matter. The assumptions felt real enough for Dale. As his cruiser came to a stop behind the sedan, he took a deep breath, feeling the rush that came every time he made a stop like this. The thrill of authority. The satisfaction of knowing he was the one in control. Dale grabbed his ticket book and stepped out of the car, his boots crunching the gravel as he approached the driver's window. A smirk played at the corner of his mouth. Let's see what this guy's hiding. The driver had already lowered the window. His face was calm, respectful, with just a hint of confusion, as if he was wondering what this stop was about. License and registration. Now, Dale barked, his tone sharp, aggressive. The man didn't flinch. He reached into his glove box, pulled out the documents, and handed them over. "Good morning, officer," the man said in a steady voice. "May I ask what I was stopped for?" But Dale ignored the question. He barely glanced at the license, not even reading the name. He wasn't looking for answers, only confirmation of the story he'd built in his head. "You don't get to ask me questions," Dale snapped. "You just answer mine. What are you doing around here? Where are you headed?" The man kept his tone respectful. "I'm on my way to a meeting. Just passing through." But that wasn't good enough for Dale. He wanted more. Needed more. There's gotta be something, he thought. "Step out of the vehicle," Dale ordered. The man hesitated just for a moment, as if weighing the situation, then quietly opened the door and stepped out. He stood tall, composed, hands visible, doing nothing that could be seen as a threat. Dale eyed the car, the suit, the man's confident posture. It only made him angrier, though he couldn't explain why, even to himself. "Where'd you get this car? Is it yours?" Dale sneered, still clinging to his baseless suspicions. The man took a slow breath, looking directly at Dale, no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was something else. Disappointment. "Officer Dale," he said quietly. "I think you should take another look at my ID." Annoyed, Dale snatched the license again and this time actually read it. And that's when the ground seemed to shift beneath him. Marcus Reynolds, Chief, Internal Affairs Division. Dale froze, the color draining from his face as the reality of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. Dale walked up to the driver's window, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. The flashing lights from his cruiser reflected off the black sedan's polished surface. But Dale wasn't focused on the car, his mind was already made up about the man behind the wheel. In his eyes, this driver didn't belong here. Probably some city slicker up to no good, Dale thought, his heart pounding with the familiar rush of authority. He squared his shoulders, puffed up his chest, and leaned toward the open window, his voice sharp and cold. License and registration. Now, he barked, making no effort to hide the hostility in his tone. The driver, a black man dressed neatly in a dark suit and tie, met Dale's gaze calmly. There was no fear in his eyes, only quiet patience. Without a word, he reached into his glove box, retrieved his papers, and handed them over. His movements were careful and deliberate. As if he'd been through stops like this before and knew how quickly things could escalate. "Good afternoon, officer," the man said, his voice even and respectful. "May I ask why I was stopped?" But Dale didn't care for the man's polite tone. In fact, it annoyed him even more. In Dale's mind, the driver should be nervous, not standing there cool and confident as if he'd done nothing wrong. "You don't get to question me," Dale snapped, giving the ID a quick glance but not really reading it. The name, the title, they didn't register. His mind was too clouded by bias and assumptions. "You just answer what I ask. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The driver remained calm, though his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if weighing the situation carefully. "I'm on my way to a meeting," he replied. Dale didn't like that answer. In truth, there was nothing wrong with it. The man was well within his rights. But Dale wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for something, anything, to justify the stop he'd made without cause. His eyes narrowed, his voice low and threatening. "Step out of the vehicle," Dale ordered. There was no reason for it. No legal grounds. But Dale didn't care. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about the law. This was about control, and making sure the man behind the wheel knew who was in charge. The driver hesitated for just a second, not out of fear, but as if silently asking himself whether it was worth arguing. Then, without a word, he unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out. His posture was steady, his hands visible, his face calm. Every move was deliberate, a quiet signal that he wasn't a threat. But Dale kept pushing. He couldn't stop now. The story he'd created in his head demanded a villain, and he refused to admit he'd made a mistake. "Where'd you get this car?" Dale sneered, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Is it even yours?" The driver drew in a slow breath, his patience thinning. His eyes met Dale's, steady and unblinking. "Officer Dale," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Take another look at my ID." Dale frowned, snatching the license from his own hand where it had been resting uselessly. He actually looked at it this time, the letters clear and unmistakable. Marcus Reynolds, Chief, Internal Affairs Division. The words hit Dale like ice water to the face. His stomach dropped. His mouth went dry. His heart, which had been beating with excitement just moments ago, now thudded with dread. Chief Reynolds watched him, saying nothing more, letting the silence do the talking. Dale could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His authority, his assumptions, his actions, all exposed in the harsh light of truth. For the first time during the stop, Dale found himself speechless. His mind raced, trying to find an excuse, an explanation, anything to undo what he'd just done. But no words came. "Yes, sir," he stammered, his voice suddenly small. I didn't realize." Reynolds cut him off with a quiet, steady voice. "That's exactly the problem, officer. You didn't realize. You didn't look. You saw what you wanted to see, and you acted on it. The highway stretched out silent around them, the sound of passing cars in the distance, as Dale stood there, realizing he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The driver took a slow, measured breath, his face calm but his eyes sharp, watching Officer Dale with a gaze that could cut through steel. It was the kind of look that said, "I've been here before, but also I won't let it slide this time." "Officer Dale," the man said, his voice low, steady, controlled. "Take another look at my ID." There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice, no threats. But the weight behind those words was undeniable. They hung in the air like a storm about to break. Dale, irritated at being challenged, snatched the ID back, ready to toss it another careless glance. But this time, his eyes actually focused on the name printed in bold letters across the top. Marcus Reynolds, Chief, Internal Affairs Division. For a split second, Dale's brain refused to register what he was seeing. He read it again, slower this time, each word hitting harder than the last. Chief. Internal Affairs. The very department tasked with rooting out police misconduct. The very office that had the power to end his career. Dale felt the blood drain from his face. His heart, which moments ago pounded with adrenaline and the thrill of control, now thudded heavily in his chest, weighed down by dread. Chief Reynolds stood tall, his suit neat, his posture unshaken. He didn't need to shout. His presence, his title, his quiet authority did all the talking. "That's right," Reynolds said, his voice calm but firm, his eyes locked on Dale. "I oversee investigations into police misconduct. And congratulations, you've just made my list." Those words hit harder than any punch. Dale's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His hands, which had gripped the ID and ticket book with confidence just moments ago, now trembled slightly. He scrambled internally, searching for something, anything, to say. "Yes, sir, I didn't realize," Dale finally stammered, his voice weak, all trace of authority gone. Reynolds didn't let him finish. "Exactly," Reynolds said sharply, his tone cutting clean through Dale's attempt at an excuse. "You didn't realize, because you didn't look. Because you didn't care. You judged me the second you saw my face. You saw a black man in a nice car, in the wrong neighborhood, and you made up your mind about who I was. You didn't see my ID. You didn't see a citizen. You didn't see a human being. All you saw was what you wanted to see." The highway felt eerily silent in that moment. No sirens, no radio chatter. Just the weight of truth sinking deep into Dale's chest. "I wasn't speeding," Reynolds continued, his voice steady but full of restrained disappointment. "I wasn't breaking any law. But you treated me like a criminal. You ordered me out of my vehicle without cause. You humiliated me on the side of the road. And for what?" Dale swallowed hard, his mind racing. How did it come to this? Just minutes ago, he felt powerful, in control, untouchable. Now he stood exposed, his own biases and failures laid bare. I didn't mean." Reynolds raised a hand, silencing him. "Stop. Don't insult my intelligence, or yours, by pretending this was an accident. This wasn't about a broken taillight or suspicious behavior. This was about what you thought you saw. And this is why people don't trust us. This is why good officers struggle to do their jobs, because actions like yours poison the well for all of us." Dale felt the sting of those words. The truth hurt more than he'd expected. Because deep down, he knew Reynolds was right. The chief took a step closer, his voice lowering but his message hitting harder. "Imagine if I weren't who I am. Imagine I was just any black man on his way to work. Would this stop have gone differently? Or would you have pushed further? Arrested me? Searched my car without cause? Used force? Dale had no answer. The images flashed in his mind. All the stories on the news, all the times he thought that could never be me, and now here he was, the villain of his own story. Reynolds took back his ID, slipping it calmly into his wallet. "This isn't over, Officer Dale," he said quietly. "We will be having another conversation, in my office." With that, Chief Reynolds turned, opened his car door, and slid behind the wheel. Without so much as a backward glance, he pulled back onto the highway, leaving Dale standing in the dust, alone, shaken, and forced to confront the truth of his actions. And for the first time in his career, Officer Dale didn't feel powerful. He felt ashamed. The road was silent now. No cars passed. No birds chirped. The only sound Dale could hear was his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, loud, heavy, like a drum of guilt echoing through his chest. The power, the authority he'd felt just minutes ago, was gone. Stripped away by the weight of his actions. And standing before him was Chief Marcus Reynolds, calm, composed, but with a presence that spoke louder than any angry shout. Chief Reynolds didn't need to raise his voice. The strength in his words came from the truth they carried, a truth Dale wasn't ready for, but one he had no choice but to face. "Officer Dale," Reynolds began, his voice steady, his eyes locked onto Dale's, "this is the problem. You are the problem. It's officers like you who damage the trust between the police and the community. You think your badge gives you the right to harass people based on the color of their skin. You think people don't notice?" Each word struck like a hammer. Dale felt smaller with every sentence. His mouth opened slightly, as if to explain, to excuse, but no sound came. Deep down, he knew there was nothing he could say. No excuse that could undo what had just happened. No explanation that could wash away the shame. Reynolds took a slow step forward, his voice lowering but somehow feeling even more powerful. "Imagine if I wasn't who I am. Imagine I wasn't the internal affairs chief. Imagine I was just any black man, heading to work, minding my business. What would you have done next, Officer Dale? Arrested me? Searched my car without cause? Called for backup because you felt threatened? Or worse?" Dale swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. His hands, which had earlier gripped his ticket book with confidence, now hung limp at his sides. The rush of adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing regret. The chief didn't let up, because the lesson needed to be learned. Every time an officer abuses their power, it doesn't just harm the person they target. It poisons the well for every officer who's trying to do the right thing. It makes people fear us. Distrust us. Hate us. And that makes all of our jobs harder. Dale felt the sting of those words. He thought of his colleagues, officers who wore the badge with pride, who served their communities with fairness. How many times had he, without realizing it, made their jobs harder because of moments like this? He wanted to apologize. To say he was sorry. But the words felt empty in his mouth. Because sorry wouldn't change what he'd done. Sorry wouldn't erase the assumptions he'd made. Sorry wouldn't rebuild the trust he'd helped break. Chief Reynolds shook his head slightly, the disappointment clear in his eyes. "You didn't stop me because I broke the law. You stopped me because I didn't fit your idea of who should be driving through this neighborhood. That's not policing, Officer Dale. That's profiling. That's prejudice. That's exactly what we're supposed to be fighting against." The weight of the moment pressed down on Dale's shoulders, heavier than his badge, heavier than his gun. He'd worn the uniform for years, telling himself he was one of the good ones. But now, faced with the truth, he couldn't deny it, in this moment, he'd been part of the problem. Reynolds took a deep breath, as if letting the tension of the encounter settle. "I didn't have to stop. I could have flashed my badge and kept driving. But I needed you to see this for what it is. Because this is what gets good officers killed. This is what tears communities apart. This is what fuels the anger, the protests, the fear. For the first time in his career, Dale didn't feel like the man with the power. He felt like the one who'd been caught. Exposed. And the worst part was knowing that the only person to blame was himself. Chief Reynolds took a step back, his voice softening, though the seriousness never left. I'm not going to yell at you. I don't need to. You're going to remember this moment. You're going to hear my words every time you think about pulling someone over. And trust me, I will see you again. In my office. Because this isn't over. Dale nodded slowly, unable to meet Reynolds' eyes. His heart sank as the reality hit him. This was the day his career, and his view of himself, changed forever. Without another word, Chief Reynolds turned, got into his car, and drove off, leaving Dale standing alone on that quiet road, with nothing but his own guilt for company. Dale one last time, his expression steady, unreadable. His words were quiet, but they carried a weight that hit harder than any punishment Dale could have imagined. Get back in your car, Officer Dale. I'll be seeing you soon, but next time, it'll be in my office. Dale didn't argue. He didn't nod. He didn't say a word. He simply turned, his boots heavy against the gravel, and walked back to his cruiser in complete silence. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the shame and regret were pressing down on him, slowing him, forcing him to face what he had done. He slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and for a long moment just sat there. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but he couldn't bring himself to start the engine. The flashing lights on his cruiser reflected back at him from the rearview mirror, casting red and blue across his pale face. For once, the lights didn't make him feel powerful. They felt like a warning. Like a reminder of everything that had just unraveled on that quiet stretch of road. The stop was over. But Dale knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The consequences begin. True to his word, Chief Reynolds filed a full report. Every detail of the stop, from Dale's baseless suspicion to his aggressive commands, was documented. There was no sugar-coating it. No hiding behind the badge this time. Dale was placed under internal review, his actions scrutinized by the very department meant to hold officers accountable. For the first time in his career, Dale felt vulnerable. Meetings were called. Statements were taken. Supervisors who had once patted him on the back now looked at him with disappointment in their eyes. The badge that had always made him feel untouchable now felt heavy on his chest. But the story didn't end with paperwork or hearings. The department decided that discipline wasn't enough. Dale needed to understand why what he did was so wrong. And that's how, a few weeks later, he found himself sitting in a mandatory bias training session, one he would have once rolled his eyes at, one he never thought he needed. The training that opened his eyes. At first, Dale sat stiffly in the chair, arms crossed, the same way he had in countless other trainings. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the memory of that stop, or maybe it was the way Chief Reynolds' words kept echoing in his mind. Whatever it was, for the first time, he listened. He listened as community members stood up and shared their stories. Black men and women who spoke about their fear when they saw flashing lights behind them, not because they were breaking the law, but because they didn't know what might happen next. Parents who spoke about teaching their kids how to survive traffic stops. Hardworking people who talked about being treated like suspects simply because of the color of their skin. Dale's chest tightened as he listened. Their words painted a picture, one that looked uncomfortably familiar. He saw his own actions reflected in their pain. Then, he heard from fellow officers, men and women who spoke about the damage that bias causes within the force. How one bad stop, one act of prejudice, can make the public turn on all officers, even the good ones trying to protect and serve. Dale had never thought of it that way before. He had always seen himself as one of the good guys. But now? Now he wasn't so sure. And perhaps most painful of all, he started to see himself the way they saw him. Not as the protector. Not as the helper. But as part of the problem. The beginning of change. It wasn't an instant fix. Change never is. Dale didn't walk out of that training session a new man. He didn't suddenly erase the mistakes of the past. But something inside him had shifted. He started to question himself before each stop. To ask, am I acting on the law, or my assumptions? He began to see people as individuals, not as threats based on where they were or what they looked like. Slowly, he worked to rebuild the trust he had damaged, within his community, and within himself. Every time Dale looked in the mirror, he remembered that day on the quiet highway. The flashing lights. The calm voice of Chief Reynolds. The shame that came from realizing he had failed the very oath he had sworn to uphold. But in that shame, he found something else, a chance to do better. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it.